All right, so Paul says that we have been called to be like Jesus. That he has set out the parameters of what we are supposed to be like, and we are to be like Jesus. Well, in this passage, Paul says that we are to be in the image or the likeness of Jesus. Now, you may read that and you may go, okay, what does that mean? Was Jesus about 6'1", rippling muscles because he worked out all the time? Okay, no. That's not what Paul is talking about. Paul's not talking about that we've all got to go color our hair black and grow it out long because Jesus probably had long hair. I know some of the people I grew up with, that would just appall them, that Jesus had long hair, but he probably did. Not saying that we need to go and grow out our beard. Okay, that's not what Paul is saying here. Paul's not talking about physical likeness, and we know that. You've read your Bibles enough. You know from Genesis that we were formed. In the beginning, we were formed and we were made in the image of God. And I will tell you that theologians and scholars have argued, and they continue to argue over exactly what the image of God is. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that I know everything of what the image of God is. But I can tell you some things that it is about. It's about how we think. It is about the fact that we can relate to each other. It carries some of those aspects. It is the things about God that we can know and we can see from the Scriptures. And being formed in the image of God, we were formed for relationship with each other. That's what I studied in the youth Sunday school today. We were talking about the fact that we have been built and we've been made in the image of God. And that part of that is that we are to relate to God, to each other, and to our world. But so when we have been made in the image of God, the likeness, we're supposed to be following in that likeness and be built into the likeness of Jesus. What exactly does that mean? Well, Romans 8:29 and 30 that we've read, it says that he chose us to become like Jesus, to be formed into his image. That is the grand plan of God for you and I, to become more and more like Jesus. And as we do that, God receives glory. As we become more and more like Jesus, as we live our lives more in the pattern of Jesus, God receives glory. Jesus told his followers when he was here on earth, he said that you should live your life to let your light shine among men so that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. That we ought to live our life in such a way that people recognize that God is working in us. And so we live in a way to glorify God by becoming more like Jesus. So what was Jesus like? Well, remember last week we talked from Mark chapter 10? And the end of that passage with Jesus talking to his disciples, and he goes in about, that the Gentiles, their leaders dominate over them. But he says at the end of that, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. The Messiah, the Son of Man, came not to be served, but to serve. One of the things that we have to understand if we want to be like Jesus is that Jesus was a servant. Jesus was one who willingly gave to others. That Jesus willingly gave of himself to those around him. And we see that throughout his life. Think about his life. He healed the blind, the lame, and the deaf. Now, in our society, that might not be that important of an idea. Because we have social services for the blind, for the lame, for the deaf. We have services, we have things set up to provide and to take care of those who cannot take care of themselves. All of those things are great. In the day that Jesus lived, they didn't have Social Security disability. They didn't have welfare. If you could not go out and work and provide for yourself, man, you are out of luck. And you had to just rely and hope that somebody would be nice and would give you some money as they went by you. And so when Jesus healed the blind, the lame, and the deaf, what he is doing is he is taking people who had nothing and no ability to get anything, and he is giving to them the ability to provide for themselves. Jesus was giving of himself, and so his healing the blind, the lame, and the deaf is an amazing and wonderful thing. Jesus willingly did that. He brought peace to those who were willing to follow him. He brought reconciliation to those who were estranged from God. You know, that is something, again, it's another thing that we go, okay, he brought reconciliation to those estranged from God. What does that mean? You know, Jesus went out and he hung out with the sinners. Jesus was known as that. He was the friend of sinners. He went and hung out with the tax collectors, with the bad people. That's who Jesus was known to hang out with. And in doing so, Jesus gave social status up. Because the good people didn't hang out with the bad people. And he willingly gave of himself to bring people back to God. Jesus touched lepers. Again, our society may not be that big a deal. He touched lepers. You know, we don't have lepers around us. But Jesus went and he touched people who were unclean. He touched people who were, to be honest, they looked disgusting. I mean, we hate to say that, but they did. I mean, these were people that their body is just wasting away. And he touched them knowing that by touching them, I become unclean. If I touch a leper, I become unclean. And their idea was that if I touch a leper, I might get this leprosy. Jesus didn't worry about it. And he went and he touched the lepers. He gave of himself. He cared for the hopeless. He cared for the ones that were forgotten by society. He gave of his time. He gave of his energy. He gave of his life to help them. He washed the feet of his disciples. We talked about it last week. It was a job that was done by the lowest of slaves. We want to be like Jesus. One thing that we have to do is that you and I must become a servant. Paul says that God has laid out the parameters of what our life is to be like. And that is to be conformed to the image, the likeness of his Son. And if we want to be like Jesus, we need to be willing to serve, to give of ourselves, and to freely pass that on. Completing God's plan for your life requires you being willing to make that sacrifice. To go back to the beginning, to be like Mike. Now, most of us, we would look at that and go, there is no way. Okay, I mean, I realized pretty early on in my life that I was not going to be able to jump as high as Michael Jordan. You know, I do not have that ability. I have white man's disease. I run slow and I don't jump very high. I figured that out pretty quick, okay? I figured that out pretty quick, that I was not going to be able to be like Michael Jordan and to be flying through the air and to dunk. You know, the only way that I can dunk a basketball is if you bring that basketball goal down to about 6 feet or 8 feet. Then, man, I can be a master dunker. Hey, but I figured that out. And I knew that it didn't matter. I mean, I could have lifted weights. I could have done all kinds of jumping exercises. I was never going to be like Michael Jordan. But God has called us to be like Jesus. Now, you and I can look and understand that we are never going to be perfect. Okay? You and I, we can work as hard as we can. We can go out and we can serve all around our community to be the best. And we can do everything we can. We got to understand, we are never going to fully be like Jesus because he was perfect. You and I are not perfect. Just like I am never going to be able to dunk on a 10-foot basketball goal, I am never going to be perfect. Does that mean I ought to just give up? No. Because you know what? Even though I knew I was never going to be able to dunk on a 10-foot basketball goal, I didn't give up playing basketball. I kept playing because I figured out, you know what? I don't have to be able to dunk a basketball. If I can stand out here about 20 feet or 25 feet from the basket and shoot it and make it, I can still play. Being like Jesus, we need to understand we're not going to be perfect. But we need to understand that Jesus has called us to serve. Because that's part of being formed into his likeness, to his image, is learning to serve. You'll never serve perfectly, but that doesn't mean we give up. And now there are places within the church, and I think we got the whole list that we had last week. I don't know if we got the right one there. Okay, I didn't get that. You remember the list last week? Remember slide after slide after slide of stuff that we do on Sunday mornings? The things that we have going on Sunday mornings, that just the things that it takes for us to be able to gather together and have church. You remember that list. There are a ton more things like that. There are things around here that you and I can do. Some of them, most of them are simple. A lot of them take 5 minutes, 10 minutes to do. But there are also things outside of this building. There are places outside of here that you and I can serve. A couple of weeks ago, the youth went down on a very cold and rainy Saturday. And they spent a couple of hours at Mary Ann Van Diver's house, just trimming some shrubs and cleaning gutters, sweeping out a garage. And you know, as I talked to Mary Ann to prepare for that, she told me that a neighbor of hers mows her yard. There's a guy that doesn't go to this church, not married, not kin, not related to Mary Ann in any way, but he comes over and he mows Mary Ann's yard because he knows that she couldn't. There are opportunities like that for you and I to serve. There are people around us that just can't do some things, and they need us. There are also organizations that reach out to try to help those in our community. I'm a part of one called Communities and Schools of Renton. I go twice a week to the school. I spend an hour. At one school, the boy loves to play basketball. And so most of the time I spend an hour and we shoot baskets and we play 21 and we talk. Is it important that we play basketball? No. I give this kid an hour and we just talk as we play. There are opportunities for you to serve in the building, and there are opportunities for you to serve outside of here. And the reality is you need to do both. And I know you can give me your excuses that you're busy. We're all busy. Every one of us has a lot of things going on in our life. You know, I can put my schedule up against any of yours. And I can say to you, boy, yeah, I've got all the excuses as to why I can't do anything else. But do you think Jesus had enough stuff to do? I mean, Jesus had to take these 12 numbskulls. That's really what they were. I mean, you know, if you look at the disciples, these guys, well, sometimes you have to wonder, why did he pick them? Well, he knew what he was doing. But he had to take these 12 guys, and he had to teach them what they needed to know so that when he left this earth, that they would be able to lead this movement called Christianity, called the church, to become what he wanted it to be. And he knew that he had a very limited amount of time. You know, Jesus knew he didn't have 20 years, 30 years to teach these guys everything they needed to know. He had 3 years at most. 3 years to take them and to explain to them who the Messiah is, to teach them what it means to be a follower of Jesus. He had 3 years to teach them all of this stuff. And not only did he have to teach them all this stuff, but in some ways he had to go back and he had to say, you know, this stuff that you think you knew from growing up, well, you kind of missed a lot of stuff. He had to knock out a bunch of stuff before he could even start teaching them. 3 years to do all of that. And yet what did Jesus do? He healed the sick. He served. He reached out to those around him. He gave time. Jesus had to have been the most busy man in the history of this world because he had the most important task that has ever been given. And Jesus said, I am not too busy for the least. And so if you want to say you're too busy, then I say you got to fight with Jesus. Because Jesus was willing to sacrifice and to serve those who were less fortunate. I want you to take your connection card. And under my I commit to, the first is, I want to be like Jesus. And I hope that you can put that. Know that when you mark that, that is saying that I want to be a servant. That I want to willingly give of my time, of my talents, of my treasures. I want to willingly give of myself to benefit somebody else. And then the second one, I want to find a way to serve Jesus outside the walls of Calvary. That is you saying, I'm going to go look. Not that I'm going to expect Pastor Grant to go find me a job somewhere doing some community service and call me and say, here, I got a job for you. I want you to mark it and saying, I'm going to go myself. And I'm going to find, whether it is finding somebody in my community that needs to get their yard mowed, that I can go and I can do work for them whenever it needs to be done, or whether that means that I'm going to go find an organization like communities and schools, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Renton Food Bank. I mean, there are tons of them. The list is only as small as what you are willing to let it be. But I'm going to go find some place where I can regularly give of who I am to help somebody else. And then the third one is I want to find a way to serve Jesus inside the walls of Calvary. If you mark that one, we talked last Tuesday night in a group and started going through the whole list that we had last week. We started kind of putting out some names. Hey, we ought to contact this person about doing this job. And they're not jobs that we have to vote in. Most of these jobs are not things that we have to vote in as a church because they don't involve any kind of governments of the church. They don't involve any kind of teaching. They're just little things that, you know what, it sure does make it nice when they get done. And so if you want to serve Jesus within the walls of the church, mark that. And we'll contact you on that one. The first one, you're on your own. There's plenty of stuff out there. You want to serve Jesus outside of here? Go find a place. When you do find a place, let me know. Because I want to pray for you. I want to say congratulations. I want to hear stories about what God is doing in your life as you are serving Him outside the walls. And then we want to help you to find some place that you can serve Jesus right here among the people that we call Calvary. But if you want to be like Jesus, if you want to fulfill God's grand plan in your life, one of the things you need to do is you need to be willing to serve and to reach out and give of yourself for others. Our Father, help us.